Since ancient times, the word cult has been surrounded by controversy. Whether they promise the arrival of a new Messiah or guilt-free pleasures of the flesh, cults have been havens for people searching for meaning. But once they're on the inside, members are often forced to decide which is more important, the life of the cult or their own lives. Join us for Cults.
In Waco, Texas, Branch Davidians suffer a horrific death by fire. In Uganda, hundreds of victims are burned to death. Is it cult suicide or murder? In San Francisco, members of the Church of Satan perform a black mass using a nude woman as an altar. In San Diego, tennis shoe-clad initiates lay dead, believing they have gone to a better place. Who are these people? What drives them to participate in acts that society calls madness? What secrets lie inside the world of cults? In its simplest form, a cult is a group of people disillusioned by mainstream religions and drawn together by a new philosophy.
Cult is a word that we use to apply to religions that we don't like. A cult is simply a church in seed form.
But before gaining legitimacy, many new religions are perceived as possessing cult-like characteristics because of their curious rituals and peculiar practices. Cults almost always have a charismatic leader, someone who makes members feel that nothing is more important than the group. Each generation creates its own definition of cult, from just another religious sect to fanatical extremists operating on society's edge. Contrary to common belief, the origins of cults date back thousands of years. The term cult comes from the Latin word cultus, which means to worship. In ancient Greece, one of the world's first known cults worships a popular drink, alcohol. It's called the cult of Dionysus, named after the Greek god of wine. It begins as a way for Greeks to celebrate the grape harvest, meaning a fresh batch of wine is on the way.
What people would get from the cult of Dionysus is basically release. A release from all the stress and pressures of knowing what the state is going to do about upcoming invasions, the stress of their personal lives. The Dionysus Festival is this time that you could just let everything hang loose. And it's okay, because you're in the service of the god during this time.
At the same time, other cults in the ancient world search for more spiritual enlightenment. Originating in Egypt, the cult of Isis becomes prominent throughout Greece and the Roman Empire. Members worship a female deity, and women serve as religious leaders. The cult of Isis forms first as a slave religion, offering solace to disenfranchised members of society.
Sometimes you would call on Isis for emotional purposes, and sometimes you would just call on Isis because she was that mother figure, the goddess. So the issues of fertility arise and having children and childbirth.
Though they are pacifists, some practice self-castration to preserve purity. Others in the cult starve themselves to death to cleanse their spirits. But the cult gains acceptance in the ancient world. The Egyptian leader Cleopatra becomes a passionate follower of Isis because it gives power to women in matters of the spirit. There are many different ways a cult can begin. Often it starts with some kind of spiritual crisis which affects the cult leader. A perfect example is that of Buddha, a wealthy Hindu prince. He searches for spiritual answers and finds enlightenment during meditation. It is a practice seen as an affront to India's religious leaders.
I mean, here was this guy who told people that you don't have to pay attention to the religious observances of the elders. You can achieve a kind of wisdom and enlightenment by breaking away from these religious structures. Buddha in his time was accused of brainwashing people.
Most cult members seek to create better lives ancestors of the Shiite Muslims are willing to kill and be killed for their beliefs.
certain cults have arisen throughout history who have advocated violence against competing philosophies, like the Assassins.
The Assassins are followers of a zealot Islamic leader named Hassan. He is a power-hungry politician who sows seeds of discontent for his own gain. Hassan promotes political unrest in Persia to gain land and wealth by any means necessary.
And they developed strongholds. These strongholds became kind of havens for them. And from those strongholds, they moved out, extracting taxes from passing travelers, committing various other crimes.
Hassan would often direct his cult members to mingle among the courts of rulers, sometimes for years, until they received a signal from him telling them to kill the unsuspecting leader. Hassan compels followers to commit such atrocities by drugging them with hashish.
It was with the intoxication which they were thought of as a form of anticipation of heavenly delights, that they were able to hold the loyalty of their members. Some specialized people developed who had no problem with killing the enemies of the group.
Hassan remains powerful until his death in 1124. The legacy of this killer cult remains in the name, which ironically during the Assassins' Day did not mean killers.
The Assassins were given their name from their use of the hashish. That's how we remember them, and that word assassin then enters our vocabulary, having more to do with their acts than the origin of their name.
Jerusalem, 29 AD. Dozens of new religions, many mixed with politically charged ideas, challenge Roman rule. Most notable is the Jewish religion, whose members believe they will soon be saved by the coming of a new Messiah.
You have a religion, the Jews, that are waiting for someone to come and deliver them from this Roman occupation, to set them free to rule again. And you have the Romans who know of this, who want to clamp down on Jewish religion because they're afraid they may get this Messiah that they keep asking for.
It is in this atmosphere that a man perceived by some as a cult leader rises from obscurity. His name, Jesus of Nazareth, called by some King of the Jews. Jesus' teachings, with an emphasis on morals rather than religious ritual, has led Rome's leaders to fear him.
I have this kind of picture in my mind of upper middle class Roman citizen going to the baths, or walking on their way to the courts, and they're making small talk and talking with each other about what's going on in their lives. And, you know, Publius says to Romanus, well, you know, my kid, he belongs to this weird group of people that they've got this cult leader out of Palestine, some Joshua, Yeshua, something like that.
Jesus and his followers are a thorn in Rome's side. They are mostly from poor families who have little connection to Roman society.
They meet late at night for secret rituals. They don't seem to have any respect for the gods of the empire. You know, to those people, Christianity was an upstart religious cult.
The crucifixion of Jesus does not kill the movement. Instead, the death of Jesus inspires his followers to create a new religion, Christianity. Many of his followers paid dearly for their beliefs. When falsely charged with heinous crimes like cannibalism, they stand strong. When tortured and killed by gladiators and lions, the blood of martyrdom fuels the cult.
Christians were persecuted in much the same way as some societies persecute cults, innovative religions today.
In the 2 centuries following his death, it's estimated that 10% of Roman society becomes Christian. The teachings of the cult slowly become accepted religious beliefs.
Most modern religious groups that are now what we might call accepted started out making their way within a culture where they weren't accepted. And that's the definition of a cult.
What makes Christianity a real religion now is that it succeeded in a kind of remarkable way. It's almost the most successful cult story of all time.
Persecution often forces those with new religious beliefs to practice their rituals in secret. One of the most secretive religions on the planet even today are the Gnostics. The religion begins as a cult in the Roman Empire during the 2nd and 3rd centuries, as a spiritual alternative to Christianity. The term Gnostic comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means revealed knowledge. Unlike Christians, Gnostics believe they have hidden knowledge of a divine realm. They believe sparks or seeds from God have fallen to earth and have become implanted in humans. It is a radical belief that challenges Christian dogma.
Whereas Christians worshiped a personal deity, they worshiped an impersonal deity. Where Christians found salvation through faith in Christ, Gnostics found salvation through Sophia, wisdom. We remember the Gnostics as the first heretics.
Shunned from the Christian mainstream, Gnostics meet in secret. They identify themselves to each other by showing religious tattoos inscribed on the inside of their arms. In the late 20th century, small bands of Gnostics still live in Iraq and Iran. They call themselves the Mandaeans and believe they are descendants of John the Baptist. They keep to themselves, practicing their ancient art of religious tattooing, being careful not to draw the attention of those who feel their belief in an inner God is blasphemy. The threat of being persecuted is often what drives members of new religious groups to flee to a new home. This is exactly what happens during the 16th and 17th centuries to a particularly hated group of religious purists in England. The people later known in America as Pilgrims are a radical separatist group from the Church of England.
They perceive the people within the Church of England as not being wholly-hearted in following after God. So their idea of plain dress, seriousness, being able to worship God and to do everything for the Lord is not being met by the leaders in the Church of England.
After years of threats and harassment by church members and the British government, the Puritans flee to Holland, but discover the Dutch way of life is also not acceptable to their beliefs. On November 21, 1620, a ship called the Mayflower drops anchor in the sheltered harbor off the site of present-day Provincetown, Massachusetts. On board are the Puritans, America's first religious cult. On the eve of the American Revolution, the search for religious freedom in the fledgling colonies is as strong as the desire for political autonomy. Those who stray too far from what religions are accepted by the colonists are sometimes branded as cults. One of the most visible of these groups is called the Shakers. Their leader is a woman, Anne Lee. In 1774, she flees persecution in England and settles in Watervliet, New York. Lee believes God visits her, and her soul is now that of Christ's. She claims the gift of tongues, that she can speak in languages unknown to her.
You couldn't get more bald-faced in an assertion of messianic identity than that. Doubly heretical. First, to claim that you're the reincarnation of Jesus or the return of the Messiah, but secondly, as a woman. Well, this was a really radical notion. Like a lot of other cult leaders, Mother Anne was hounded.
Lee and her followers form one of the first known heaven on earth cults. These groups believe the second coming of Christ is imminent. It is the cult members' duty to purify themselves and the world for his arrival. Lee calls her new religion the Shakers, named after the radical trance-like dance in which members violently vibrate. They are shunned and looked upon with disdain by others in the early colonies. False accusations about the true nature of Shakers start to fly. It's rumored that followers are under some type of mind control.
There were lots of allegations about crimes that the Shakers were practicing and the evil, they didn't call it brainwashing, but they called it sophistry. They called it vile persuasion. And Shakers in their day, and we're talking the late 1700s, early 1800s, were accused of child abuse, were accused of kidnapping children from their families.
Ironically, one of the main tenets of the Shaker religion is one that will bring its doom. Anne Lee believes members of her church should not marry or have sex.
As a young wife, she was pregnant on several occasions, and on each occasion lost her child. She developed a great aversion to sexuality. And out of this, she developed a new religion, but celibacy was very much a part of it.
They practiced a radical celibacy. I mean, no sex at all. You joined the Shaker Church, you gave up sex for the rest of your life. That's kind of a hard sell.
Men and women are never allowed to touch one another. Only in their bizarre trance-like dance rituals do the Shakers express the pent-up frustrations of lives without sex. To keep their faith alive for future generations, the Shakers decide to open orphanages, taking children whose parents have died on the frontier and teaching them the Shaker religion. But once state governments begin running orphanages in the last half of the 19th century, the Shaker religion starts to die out. Their legacy continues not with their religious practices, but in living history programs that celebrate the renowned craftsmanship of Shaker furniture makers and in the furniture itself. Today, there are only a handful of Shakers alive.
We will live to see the end of the Shaker community. It has ceased to exist as anything but a corporation that owns a lot of valuable property. And of course, the Shaker property has now been turned into museums and tourist attractions.
Other heaven on earth cults evolve into more accepted religions. The Amish, the Mennonites, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Seventh-day Adventists all create secretive societies that to this day are misunderstood and looked upon by outsiders with curiosity. But the best-known group that started out in the grips of cult paranoia and evolved into a major religion is the Church of Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as the Mormons. In the early 1800s, Joseph Smith, a young farmer and sometimes treasure hunter from a poor family in Palmyra, New York, has a series of visions calling him to restore the true Christian religion.
And Jesus Christ told Joseph to not unite himself to any of the churches at the time, and that he would be an instrument in the hands of God through which the Church of Jesus Christ would be restored to the earth.
Smith claims an angel guides him to a set of golden plates buried in a hill near the family farm. On the plates are hieroglyphics, which Smith translates by the gift and power of God. The text is printed in 1830 as the Book of Mormon, named after the ancient American who had supposedly written the tablets. Smith's religion attracts a large number of women as well as poor men who feel they have yet to stake their claim in this new country. They see Smith and his new religion as a way out, a path to spiritual happiness they have not yet found. But Mormons are ridiculed for their practices, especially polygamy. They are beaten by their neighbors, and like the Puritans before them, they are forced to flee from their communities. But everywhere they go, Smith and his followers are still able to find converts to join them.
There was persecution of the church almost immediately, and so the church ended up moving.
The Mormons settle in Kirkland, Ohio, but are once more met with hostility. Smith and his followers soon move again, this time to Illinois, still looking for the new heaven on earth. To protect themselves, they travel in large numbers. This adds to the hatred of the new church. Thousands of Mormons moving into an area can easily alter the balance of economy and politics in a region.
Your incomings shall be
in Nauvoo, Illinois, Smith and his followers become a driving political force. It is rumored he has 27 wives, though he admits to having only one. On June 27, 1844, while awaiting trial on treason and conspiracy charges, he and his brother Hiram are killed by a mob in the Carthage, Illinois jail. Soon after Smith's death, a Mormon missionary named Brigham Young leads church followers on an arduous journey west, eventually settling in Salt Lake City, Utah, where the church flourishes.
The thoughts on our early beginnings of Mormonism are one of great gratitude, actually, and of of an admiration for their sacrifice, their diligence, and their commitment. You must remember that some of these people sacrificed literally everything.
In Utah, Young finds sanctuary. The Mormons are accepted not as a cult, but as a mainstream religion. While many groups perceived as cults begin in a search for a new religious philosophy, some throughout history are formed out of a fascination with God's enemy, Satan. Satanic cults begin in the Dark Ages during the Spanish Inquisition. When midwives are labeled as witches, Catholic writers charge that they are in league with the devil. But at the turn of the 20th century, a new version of satanic cult worship takes effect, spawned by the teachings of a British occultist named Aleister Crowley.
He was undoubtedly the greatest practitioner of religious magic in this century. He quickly gains a leadership role. He's quite controversial because he pushes ahead over people who are older and reportedly more experienced than he is.
In the heavily Victorian age, Crowley gleefully practices the ways of wickedness. He is a heavy drinker and a bisexual who incorporates his voracious sexuality into his occult practices. He creates his own cult, the Ordo Templi Orientis. He publishes dozens of books. His motto is, "Do what you will." He attracts hundreds of followers across Europe who practice his philosophy of living for the moment. Crowley is labeled by newspapers of the time as the wickedest man in the world.
People would perceive Crowley and their followers who realize that this is worship of Satan as being very outside of what is normal accepted behavior.
Crowley becomes a heroin addict. Following the death of his son during one of his rituals, Crowley goes insane. He dies in obscurity in 1947. 20 years later, Crowley's focus on promiscuous sex and magic catches the attention of a San Francisco occultist named Anton LaVey.
If you take that definition of a cult being some group of people that are not finding answers with conventional religions, then certainly Satanists would fit into that category. We don't require the same kind of adherence to protocols and dogma that a lot of people expect from conventional religions.
In 1966, LaVey, a former crime photographer and lion tamer, begins to study the teachings of Aleister Crowley. In this rare footage, LaVey performs a satanic ritual where he takes sexuality and magic one step further, combining man's love of sex with demonic worship. It is spawned by what LaVey sees as sexual hypocrisy in the Catholic Church.
He'd see the same guys lusting after the women on Saturday night, coming to pray and repent on Sunday morning. And he was rather disdainful of humans in general.
When LaVey comes along, he provides a way for people to have both the mystical experience and the experience of sexual freedom and letting go of everything.
But I can do anything that I want to. I can pursue any kind of lustful desires that I might feel. I can engage in any activities that are so-called sinful activities and not really worry about any ecumenical councils making it right for me to do.
He began to gather an eccentric group of individuals around him who are interested in the dark side of life. I mean, he's the ultimate rebel. He rebelled against God.
LaVey authors the Satanic Bible, outlining the tenets of his belief.
Satan represents indulgence instead of abstinence. Satan represents vengeance instead of turning the other cheek. Satan represents all of the so-called sins, as they all lead to physical, mental, or emotional gratification. Satan has been the best friend the church has ever had, as he has kept it in business all these years.
Inside his black house in San Francisco, LaVey's followers practice the main ritual of Satanism, the Black Mass.
A Black Mass in general follows the outline of a Roman Catholic Christian Mass. but the idea is it parodies it at various points, and it's designed so as to both insult Christianity and at the same time to say, we don't believe that anymore.
The Mass features black candles and a nude woman as an altar. The most famous section of the Black Mass is repeating the Lord's Prayer backwards, intended as an insult to Catholicism.
Satanism is Christianity turned upside down. That is, people who practice Satanism are basically Christians who want to refute what Christianity does. To do that, they affirm things that are exactly opposite of Christianity, and then they parody Christianity in their rituals, particularly Roman Catholic Christianity.
LaVey's Church of Satan attracts attention.
The church spread and became a national organization within a couple of years. And though it never had more than a few thousand members, it was such an affront to many people that it became quite well known.
With LaVey's death in 1996, membership diminishes, but his creation, the Church of Satan, remains, but with less notoriety. In the tumultuous times of the 1960s and 70s, dozens of new religions, called cults by mainstream society, offer spiritual answers to earthly suffering. Followers of the Reverend Sun Myung Moon and his wife are preparing a new heaven on earth, holding mass weddings for their followers. The Hare Krishnas, with their shaved heads in monastic Hinduism, accost travelers at airports. These groups draw skepticism and scorn, but are generally harmless. However, other new religions gain more sinister notoriety. They are killer cults. In 1977, a group calling itself the People's Temple is about to become one of the most infamous cults in history. Their leader, Jim Jones, is a charismatic Oakland preacher in search of religious and political freedom. His flamboyant talk captivates thousands.
Jim Jones was a pastor in a mainline Christian denomination, what we would think of as a liberal Protestant group, a member of the National Council of Churches.
Jones envisions a world where people live together without racial divisions. His sermons are full of hope for the creation of an earthly paradise.
He was a sort of a left-wing theologian, preaching a form of what came to be known as liberation theology, an attempt to mix Marxist and Christian ideas together, and then he became even more radical. Some say he lost all of his Christianity and became a pure Marxist.
But eventually, negative publicity starts oozing out from disgruntled members of Jones' own congregation. They claim that he stages phony healing rituals in which some of his followers fake being sick and are dramatically cured when Jones lays hands on them, and that he demands increasing control over their lives, threatening and humiliating all who fail to obey his orders. News organizations begin taking a hard look at Jones and his flock.
Jim Jones was able to present himself and his followers in such a way that they looked as though they were pillars of the community. And it's only towards the end that people begin to find out that perhaps the community was not what it should have been.
Jones' belief of sharing wealth by having his members give their welfare checks to him for redistribution quickly draws criticism from local politicians. When officials in the Bay Area threaten to shut down his church, Jones acts. Jones and nearly 1,000 of his followers moved to the South American country of Guyana. At the compound, religion turns to rage. Jones rules with an iron fist. He doesn't allow members to leave. At the request of concerned relatives of church members, San Francisco Congressman Leo Ryan travels to Guyana to investigate. Jones sees his arrival as a threat.
The group was very much threatened when Congressman Ryan from San Francisco visited the group, and for some reason not altogether clearly understood, saw in his visit the possibility of the group's disintegration.
At the local airport, all hell breaks loose. Several of Jones' followers, fanatics willing to kill for their leader, open fire. They kill Ryan and 7 members of his entourage. Hours later, knowing the world is closing in on his cult, Jones orders his followers to drink a special punch of Kool-Aid, laced with cyanide. Jones himself refuses to drink the poison. Instead, he puts a gun to his head and pulls the trigger. The mass suicide of nearly 1,000 people shocks the world. 20 years later, another charismatic religious leader is at the center of society's cult paranoia. His name, David Koresh. He leads a group called the Branch Davidians. They live at the Mount Carmel compound outside of Waco, Texas.
The Branch Davidians were an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They had been in Waco for about 60 years, had their own church center where a number of their members lived communally. Their understanding was that at some time in the not-too-distant future, Jesus would emerge and that they would become a part of his return.
The leader of the Branch Davidians has a phenomenal ability to memorize scripture, which he recites for hours on end. His followers believe Koresh is a prophet who is preparing the earth for the second coming of Christ. Though many find his theology bizarre, others are drawn to him wholeheartedly.
Koresh was in the process of developing a new and rather innovative variation on the whole theology of the Branch Davidians. A new view that put himself and the members there at Mount Carmel right in the center of the future cosmic scheme.
David Koresh eventually, who thought himself as the Messiah figure, wanted to beget 24 children who would become the elders who would surround the throne as foretold in the book of Revelation. And, sure, these beliefs are kinky and they're strange.
But the government views Koresh as more than just strange. They see him as dangerous. Some ex-Davidians claim that Koresh sexually abuses members. Defenders of Koresh claim that these former members are being set up by the government to disparage his name. The government is also concerned because Koresh is stockpiling and selling weapons. On February 28, 1993, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, the ATF, surrounds the compound.
The more some groups are cornered, the more these groups may become more deviant than they are, and so calling a group an evil cult may become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
In an attempt to arrest Koresh, the ATF storms the compound. The Davidians fight back. Four government agents are killed in the gun battle. It is unknown how many Davidians might have lost their lives in the hail of gunfire. For 51 days, government agents lay siege outside the compound. Then, on April 19th, ATF agents attempt another raid. Hoping to force the group out of the compound, an armored tank loaded with tear gas attacks the building. But soon after the assault begins, flames are spotted inside the structure. Within minutes, the entire building is engulfed in flames. 9 Davidians escape, but 77 men, women, and children are killed. It remains unclear whether those who lost their lives went to their deaths willingly or were under the control of Koresh until the end. The event creates a hailstorm of controversy about how the government should deal with so-called cults.
Well, maybe they would have died out, although the group had a long lineage and a heritage before David Koresh ever joined them as their leader. Maybe they would have died out, maybe they would have gone on, maybe they would have gotten violent. We don't ever know. But I think we have to be very careful when we assume that there's some evil process at work here, a process of persuasion which leads people astray and in violation of the law.
But the echoes from events at Waco reverberate 2 years later, spurred on by the belief that the Waco incident is the result of a great government conspiracy to usurp individual rights. Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols take revenge into their own hands when, on the 2nd anniversary of the massacre at Waco, they blow up the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. At the close of the 20th century, a new wave of death cults captivates the world's attention. In England, France, and Switzerland, Solar Temple cult members commit mass suicides over 3 years. Most baffling, the 74 people who killed themselves, believing they were going to their own heaven on a distant planet, are people who seem to have everything to live for.
We normally stereotype a cult as being composed of poor, young, disparate people. Now, the Solar Temple was composed of some hundreds of business persons, and some of them, including some very astute businessmen, in the end became persuaded that the world was gonna end, and so it was very rational to exit this world by committing suicide.
Suicide is the option for another group of seemingly rational people, the Heaven's Gate cult in San Diego. The cult is led by an eccentric leader named Marshall Applewhite, who calls himself Doe. He believes that individuals must follow rigorous religious teachings and places salvation outside of this world.
We hope to be of some service to you in this short time before our departure. And I say it's a very short time before our departure. So our thoughts will be of you. We hope that your thoughts will be of our Father's kingdom. Thank you.
On March 26, 1997, Doe leads 39 members of the Heaven's Gate cult to their deaths, a cult suicide by poison.
The Heaven's Gate group had been around for 25 years. It had pursued the goal of having the people transported out of this world into a better world that existed in another dimension. The instrument of that transporting was to be some flying saucers. Those flying saucers never came.
The police video of Heaven's Gate members lying dead, poisoned under their cloaks, shocks the world and again raises societal concerns about how people are drawn into fringe groups.
The Heaven's Gate people, they work during the day just like the rest of us. But very often in some of these groups it becomes a whole lifestyle that is different or exaggerates their belief. And I think that's the answer as to why these people are feared.
But the motivation of deaths in suicidal cults is not always religious, even when it appears to be. In Uganda, the movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments cult waits for Armageddon at the turn of the century. When the world doesn't end, nearly 1,000 church members turn up dead. At first, it's thought to be mass suicide, cult members taking their own lives for their beliefs. Officials now say it was murder. Cult leaders, not wanting to give up money and power, killed their own people.
I would be the last person to deny that religion can often turn violent. But mainstream religion has been violent as well at times in the past. I think the worst crimes of Jim Jones and the People's Temple hardly compare against the Inquisition.
Death cults like Uganda's movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments are the exception. Most new religions are peaceful, wanting merely to practice their beliefs. But for society, it is a fine line between a religion and a cult, and often a difficult one to see.
secret knowledge, secret rituals, a sense of community. These things don't change. People are always looking for a sense of belonging, a sense of specialness, a sense that their belief is the right belief and that no one else can tell them differently. So I think what we'll see in the new millennium is a continuation of what we have seen in the past. Cults, cults, and more cults.
An academic study of cults is turning out to be just as controversial as cults themselves. In his book, Mystics and Messiahs, Penn State professor Philip Jenkins argues that most cults provide their members with spiritual benefits, and that anti-cult hysteria is often based on irrational fear. Professor Jenkins claims that for every destructive cult that makes headlines, there are dozens that add to America's rich and colorful religious tapestry.